Da, 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 da.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Liz Huddle, the Director of Events and Marketing at Politics and Prose, and welcome to our first Indie Press Night with Milkweed Editions, the Milkweed Editions edition. Welcome. Tonight, we're going to hear from two authors published by Milkweed, Aimee Nezhukumatathil and Makenna Goodman, as well as Milkweed's Director of Marketing, Joanna Demkiewicz. Is that right? Demkiewicz? Did I do it?
You did it. Yeah.
I get really nervous. To get a sense both of their individual voices and of the editorial mission of Milkweed as a whole and how they all interconnect. But basically, we'll just talk. At any time, you can ask a question down at the bottom of the screen, and we'll go through as many questions as we can. This is a safe space for conversation and creativity, and no bullshit is tolerated, but we are open to great, complicated questions. I've seen what the guest list looks like, so please, I see you. Ask a question. I will also put the links for both of the books in the chat to purchase The Shame and World of Wonders on PNP's website. Book sales enable us to continue to bring you this programming that we are so proud of. It doesn't pay for itself. So we desperately, desperately need the sales to sustain us. So please buy a book tonight. The authors need it as well, and as does Milkweed. Aimee is the author of 4 previous poetry collections, Oceanic, Lucky Fish, At the Drive-In Volcano, and Miracle Fruit. World of Wonders, In Praise of Fireflies, Whale Sharks, and Other Astonishments is her first collection of essays. Makenna is an editor and writer whose work has appeared so many places in the Paris Review, Electric Literature, Lit Hub, Catapult, and many others. The Shame is her first novel. Joanna is the marketing director at Milkweed Editions. She also co-ran The Riveter, which celebrated narratives in journalism by women and non-binary folks. And she too is a writer, and her work can be found in Nylon, Literary Hub, the Los Angeles Review, and many others. All right, how is everybody? I know Makenna and Aimee, you've done a ton of these, and I'm wondering, with your virtual book tours, if there's anything that you've grown to love about them. Because I know, I don't want to say that, like, I don't want to look for a silver lining because I think that's kind of ridiculous. But when I think about the fact that I used to do events in rooms with other people, it just seems weird and gross to me. And I'm wondering if there's been any part of this book tour that has surprised you or that you found special in this format, if that makes any sense.
Makenna, do you have an answer first, or?
Well, this is my first book, so I have nothing to compare it to. And all I can say is it's been great. And I am in an alternate universe all the time. And Zoom is one of those alternate universes. And I think, I don't think that probably an event like this might have been able to happen, or certainly some people that I've been paired with may not have been able to happen in person. So I think that the Zoom reality has been good for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that too. Gosh, that's right, Makenna. Like all the debut authors, of course, my heart like sank when so many of my friends this is their first book and this happened, but they're all kind of digging it a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, obviously it's not ideal, right? In any situation, it's not ideal, but there's a lot of good from this, One is that for sure, the amount of people that get to come to these events, you know what I mean, is incredible. Like I had a cousin in Saudi Arabia who tuned in, on one of my events, and there's no way. We haven't literally seen each other since, 1999, I think. So she's a grown woman. She's married now. When I last saw her, she was a kid. So the fact that there's people all over the world that can come to these events, and also like on a personal note, I have 2 kids at home, and as much as I love traveling, I love room service and things like that. I miss room service. I'm not gonna lie.
Get all to yourself.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. but I also, it's the travel part that I hate. Like I hate mouth breathers, sitting way too close, or man spreading on a plane, and just being in a kind of a depressing hotel, multiple times, and then rushing through the airport to get home. And after this event, after the evening's done, I can walk out and still read my youngest a bedtime story. So it's been kind of, you're right, silver lining is a weird thing to say in all of this, but at the same time, it's been kind of cool.
I do think the conversations have been more intimate.
Yes.
And I'm interested to see how that's replicated in real life in the same way.
Yes.
I think especially authors often feel so comfortable in their own surroundings that it's a little bit less performative and can be more about the text, but I don't know if that's always true.
It's also interesting, just not to belabor the point, but I was thinking about how they're all recorded. And so they all these intimate conversations actually exist and can be rewatched. And I'm finding that to be the most surprising. Like, I was interviewed recently, and it was an amazing interview. It was lovely. And the woman said, I've listened and watched all of your events. And it was like, whoa, because you can do that. Whereas before, I'm imagining, Aimee, you've done this a lot. The events remain a mystery, except for the article that may or may not have been written about them, or however many people were there. So it's kind of interesting that they exist forever now.
Yeah. No, it is kind of great. I mean, I think for my eldest, I've been traveling since he was born, basically. And I think in his, like, he sees it. Like, I'm not sure if he's tuned into this one, but he's tuned into many of them before. And so he sees that I'm doing these events now, whereas before it'd be like, Mommy's going off to some mystery place and she comes back and I guess she has readers, but who are these people? So, or like fans, but who are these people? So yeah, just having them saved for the future, is so great.
Definitely a time capsule.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's start by hearing, Makenna, let's start with you by just hearing if you could give us a couple of words about kind of the shame and read us a little bit so we can kind of get a sense of your voice and the novel.
Sure. So The Shame is a novel, and it's interesting. It's hard I find it challenging to talk about one's own book in a way, because there's so many different things I could say. But in general, the plot is a woman lives on a homestead in rural Vermont with her 2 young children and her husband, who's a philosophy professor, and they live very close to the land, and they live a very sort of ethical life, as close to the land as they can. However, Alma, the narrator, feels trapped in a way by her choices, even though they're good choices. And she values them still. There's this feeling of being trapped within motherhood, and she has 2 little kids, and her husband's being celebrated all day, and she's sort of at home kind of dealing with the, women's work, women's labor, as well as farming. And she is isolated, and she finds community through women writers that she's reading. And she decides she has to write a novel in response to these women writers as a way to be in conversation with them for real. And what she does is, upon looking for a character to use a person for character development, she becomes fixated by a woman online that she's using as a model for character development. And so her research kind of spirals into an obsession that takes her down a path. And what I was interested in exploring, and the question that I felt really compelled to ask over and over again, was, what is one's work in the world, and how is that labor interpreted by oneself, by one's partner, by one's children, and just in general, the kind of implications of the choices that you make in your life. And it's kind of like, I think about it, it's like an existential question, a spiritual question, the idea of, depending on what lens you put on your life, you can see it in a different way, sort of regardless of where you're coming from or where you're going. And you can take it out of a small bag in a way and say, does this still fit? Does this still make sense? But it's also kind of about the trappings of capitalism and how, regardless of whether one might decide to take an ethical path, we're still ensnared in a system of extraction and oppression, regardless of if your political values say otherwise. So that's what it's exploring. And anyway, sorry. So I'm going to read the beginning of chapter 2. And for context, basically, the book, there are parts that are, so the book is on a long drive. It takes place over the span of only one day. And basically, most of the book is this woman in the car driving away from her family, recollecting how she got here. And there are, she tells her children's stories at night. So that is the backstory to this. There once was a little boy who lived on a farm. Every morning he woke up, ate an egg in a hole made with eggs from his own chickens, and watched his mother brew coffee in her faded nightshirt. Sometimes, after his father emerged from the bathroom holding the newspaper, the little boy would watch him slip a hand up her shirt as his mother peeped with surprise like a stuck chick. After breakfast, the little boy would go and visit the laying hens, as it was his job to collect their eggs and give them food and water. The king of the flock was named Mr. Flash, and as the only rooster, he felt very important and protective of his hens. Every morning, Mr. Flash would fluff his tail feathers, crow at the top of his lungs, and, usually while the boy wasn't watching, but occasionally when he was, fuck a layer, even though she squirmed to get away, just like nature intended. The boy wasn't necessarily fond of Mr. Flash, but the rooster provided entertainment and a musicality that set the mood, except when the little boy's sister was napping outside and his mother shouted, "God damn it," and raced to check underneath the blanket she'd thrown over the stroller to keep her little parrot from waking up and talking. Mr. Flash, despite his regular vulgarity with the hens, did his due diligence keeping order, and on a few occasions, he even successfully fought off the neighborhood fox coming to try his luck at a free lunch. So the little boy's family accepted the fowl's patriarchal benevolence and continued to provide him with food, water, bedding, and all the other demands of a responsible animal husband. Then, one day, Mr. Flash woke the boy and his family early with a god-awful crowing, louder than ever before and incessant, as if to announce a change of heart. For Mr. Flash began to show aggressive behavior toward his benefactors, even daring to attack the little boy while he was filling the feed dish and collecting the morning eggs. This was, of course, frightening, though at first the little boy gave the rooster the benefit of the doubt. He would approach Mr. Flash diplomatically, with ripe rose hips, only to be lunged at and chased until the boy hurtled over the coop's perimeter fence. Finally, the little boy abandoned the treats and resorted to wielding a pine branch as a shield every morning, waving it around desperately to protect himself from Mr. Flash's dagger-like spurs. After nearly a week, the little boy divulged the violence of his mornings to his mother, who was disturbed and who recounted the story to the little boy's father that evening when he returned home from work. And so, later that night, while the little boy was sleeping, his father went out with a .22 and killed Mr. Flash, throwing his body into the woods. The next morning, the little boy woke up as usual, came downstairs, and watched his mother make his egg in a hole in her faded nightshirt. He saw his father pour his mother a cup of coffee and give her a loving pat. And then he noticed something different. The rooster hadn't crowed. And when he went outside after breakfast, pine shield in hand, Mr. Flash was nowhere to be seen. The little boy thought this was weird and went inside to tell his father, who was reading the newspaper at the breakfast table, toast hanging from his mouth. His parents followed the little boy to the coop and agreed that Mr. Flash was missing. "That's odd," said his father. "That's strange," said his mother. "Maybe the fox got him." The fox, of course! The little boy was sure it was the fox. In fact, he had heard a scuffle outside the night before as he was falling asleep. That devil, he had finally gotten what he had been wanting. Still, the little boy was sure that Mr. Flash had been eaten while bravely trying to save the layers, so the little boy could still have his fresh eggs for breakfast every morning. It was one thing to be murdered, and quite another to die a hero. Later that day, after the little boy had safely collected the eggs from the henhouse with no fear of injury, he went on a walk with his mother and baby sister down the long dirt driveway to the mailbox.
On the way, the little boy noticed a pile of poop in the center of the lane. He ran ahead to investigate. Sure enough, it was still warm. The boy let his hand hover over the pile without touching it. He picked up a stick from the side of the road and began poking at the poop, breaking it apart to inspect its contents. He saw seeds, some grass, and a few whole half-ripe blackberries. But then, there it was. Right in the middle of the biggest poop was a beak. The boy was triumphant. The fox had done it and shat out proof.
That's really wonderful too, because when I read that, I didn't hear that tone of voice in my head. Do you know? I mean, it sounded so different to me. Do you know what I'm talking about, Yana? Like, that's just great. Aimee, may we hear from you?
Sure. I just want to sit for a little bit. It's like I have no appropriate transition here, but
There's none. So we'll.
I'll just.
It's good writing. That's the only transition. Yeah.
Or what about telling us about your book?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I suppose I should do that.
Thank you for doing it. Thanks.
That nervous laughter here, Makenna, because I'm like, that everything's fine. I'm just not disturbed at all by this. But yes, thank you, Makenna. That was so. Just to reiterate, that was not the voice I'm picturing in my head as well. So that's the first time I had heard that. You know, I'd read it before, but that's the first time I had heard that voice. I love it. It's so spooky. All right, this is World of Wonder. I'm so excited about this. This is my first hardback, and I'm not going to even pretend I have any chill whatsoever because I don't. And I think that's also okay. Like, why do we need to have chill about a brand new book that we worked hard for, you know? So I don't. But I will tell you that this is a book that I'm so happy about, so proud of. It's got the most incredible pictures that are illustrated here. And Liz, can I share my screen just real quick?
Absolutely, I think so.
All right, I didn't clear this beforehand, but I think, yeah.
Try to do it.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, and just because I'm extra, I have a little, how do you not share these things, you know? So let me do play. See, this is extra, sorry. Okay, here we go. So here's the little Potu Bird, and these are all from Fumi Nakamura. I was so excited to be able to work with an Asian American illustrator who just nailed it in terms of getting all of these animals anatomically correct, but also just a touch of whimsy. And our amazing art director, Mary Austin Speaker, did these spot colors to really kind of highlight you know, it's kind of also a callback to the old textbooks that I used to look at when I was a little kid. They'd only have like one color for the whole book, you know, and that kind of thing. So I just love what they've done here with the illustrations. If you don't know what a cassowary is, you have to look this up. But one little thing, I want to stop the share here and then share something else. And then I'll read just a very short part, is just because I think this is going to make everybody's day cheerful. You have to see, I'm going to read a section from one of my essays called The Superb Bird of Paradise. And this is a collection of about 20 or so animals and plants that I just found so magical, and I just wanted to shout about them. Again, it's like me not having any chill about the animals and plants that are in this book. And I wanted to include things that are familiar, like the monarch butterfly, and things that are not maybe as familiar as the Superb Bird of Paradise. So here's just a little snippet of one of the dances.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, this is one of the blackest feathers in the animal kingdom.
Oh my gosh.
That's wild.
Great. If I ever got a tattoo, I can't handle needles, but if I ever did, it would be at this bird. People think it would be the axolotl or a narwhal, but it's actually, I just love this face.
Is it a mating dance? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, a mating dance.
Is she into it?
I think the female is not impressed.
No.
So that's all I'll do for right now. And then I'll read just a little part of it. But I just wanted to get that visual. And again, Fumi Nakamura has a great visual here as well. And here we go. I'm going to just do a little excerpt of the superb bird of paradise, Lopharina superba. And I'm going to jump right in here. This is talking about the day of my wedding in a very small town. On the day of my wedding, the town square, my sleepy little village in western New York, burbled over with a small sea of saris. The saris came in every shade, reds, violets, liquid inks, and especially teal and turquoise, the colors of our wedding. What a dance party we had at the reception with these sari colors flashing in the DJ's portable light show, which is why I was reminded of the Lopharina superba, not the lesser or the greater, but the superb bird of paradise as I looked out on the dance floor. Now the superb is a bird of many colors. Its beak is like the blackest black night in January when you're trying to write a letter on black construction paper with a black swan feather dipped in India ink. It's pretty black. When the superb hoists up its long black nape feathers, it looks like it's swooshing an elliptical cape around its neck. It's one of the showiest displays around in the entire animal kingdom. Iridescent blue feathers on the superb's head flash extra blue as they catch the sun, little eyes against the black oval of its nape. This colorful bird dances along at about 8 inches tall and lives in New Guinea. It eats mostly fruits and berries, but has been known to nosh on the occasional small lizard. The superb bird of paradise leads a pretty solitary life, except for mating season. Perhaps my favorite detail about these birds is the male actually clears a dance floor before he gets his groove on, laying down leaves or scraps of paper to mark the boundaries. Then comes the courtship dance. The bird spreads his black tail feathers in a fan, and he starts to jump and bounce before the female with that wide, horizontal turquoise stripe blazing into the shape of a cartoon mouth, the only color left emblazoned on those dark feathers. We had only 3 songs on the do not play list for our dance: Strokin', the chicken dance, and the Macarena. When we were on the party bus on the way to our reception, my new husband received a text from our DJ saying that he'd come down with a case of the shingles, but don't worry, he was sending a great replacement and would knock $100 off our bill. Unsurprisingly, the dance floor cleared after the playing of 4 or 5 songs that nobody recognized. People were still smiling, drinking, and chatting, but nobody was dancing. Frantic, I scream whispered to my husband with my tightest, brightest smile. Tell him to play any upbeat song from 2005. Too late. I recognized those rumba notes at once. But then something extraordinary happened. Not only did everybody take to the dance floor when the Macarena blasted over the speakers, but because of its interactive nature, everybody started dancing with each other. My husband's cousin from Western Kansas was facing my second uncle from India with outstretched hands. A distant cousin was shaking her hips, wrapped in a pink sari, at one of my best friends from grad school. My husband's grandparents popped their hands behind their heads alongside my dear Filipino friends from New York City, Joseph and Sarah. How did everybody know this dance? And I'll pause there. So anyways, just the whole book is kind of like bringing in animals and plants from the natural world with little snippets of my life. And in that case, how I was first horrified that we were playing the actual Macarena at my wedding when I specifically said not to, but that it ended up being like the turning point in my wedding where both sides of the family, again, Philippines, India, and then Western Kansas just all came together. Anyway, so yeah, thank you so much.
So Aimee, this brings up a question that I have for both of you, which I think I was telling Makenna is a little bit unformed, but so I'm just gonna lay it out there. I've been thinking about both of your books kind of under the lens of before time and after time.
Yes.
Because I read both of them in the early days of the quarantine. And in certain ways, to me, the perspectives that you offer kind of railed against the dominant paradigm 6 months ago and a year ago, and now they've become almost more integrated in normal life. And Aimee, I'm thinking about how this rediscovery of the natural world, right? Like national parks are full and people are tending their gardens. And to me, your book is about attention. And I feel like it's something that people are rediscovering now in a new way, like attention to the natural world. Do you think that like real attention to the natural world is inherent, or is it taught, or is it learned, or is it practiced? I have a heron outside where I'm staying, and every morning I look at it trying to find a lesson from it. And thus far it's taught me no lesson, but I keep trying. And I was just kind of wondering if you see signs in our culture of a growing awareness to the natural world, or at least an attempt of a growing awareness.
That's such a great question. And I would say it's kind of a little bit of all of the above, right? I mean, on the one hand, I think you spend time with kids under 6 at all, you don't really have to teach them how to wonder or to say, I mean, every other word is look at this leaf shaped like a bear, look at this tree, look at the moon, look. Something happens around junior high where it becomes not cool anymore to exclaim or to show enthusiasm. And for many of us, many of my dear friends that I'm still friends with, we never stopped. We didn't care what other people say. I just told you I don't have chill for many, many things, and I still don't,
Yeah.
And most of my loved ones, if not appreciate that, they tolerate it, you know what I mean? And I wouldn't want to have it any other way. And I would say, though, also, especially in 2020, it is a practice to be astonished and to have wonderment. There's definitely days where I just want to hide under my weighted blanket and, and hide from everybody, and not be outside at all. I just want to just hibernate until things get better, whatever that means. So I would say it's a little bit of both, but I would say that because I've been, by the way, this is not one of those revelations like, oh, because I'm a mother, I have this revelation now. No, when I was in grad school, and I frankly didn't like kids, or at least didn't plan on having kids, I loved working with kids because they also had that sense of wonderment. So when I was in grad school, I was working with kindergartners on writing about the outdoors or pretending that we were bugs and writing what that felt like. And I didn't really have to do anything. I just was helping them write, you know what I mean? But they're the ones who come up with these metaphors. They speak normally in metaphors. They speak lovingly of the natural world. And I didn't have to really teach them how to do that, But I would say that one of the many sadnesses of the people in charge of our government has been this almost gleeful acceptance and bragging of how much people don't believe in science. So it's almost like gleeful or patriotic to suddenly not believe in facts or the natural world or to care for the natural world. And that is one of the most horrifying things that I've seen come out of this, because as a result, I think when you don't know the names of the birds that are in your forest and you are okay with spreading pesticides, that you don't know that there's birds in there called, a warbler or a dick sizzle or a titmouse or, all these just great names to say. And you don't realize that those birds are also going to be affecting the salamanders. Those salamanders are going to be affecting insects and pollinators that are in the forest. And, Annie Dillard has this great line, like the more we get to know about the plants and animals, the less appetite we have for destruction. And I see that all the time. So I think it's definitely a practice that we should be doing. Once you get to know a little bit of these animals and plants, how could you want to kill them? How could you want to continue destructive behaviors? That kind of, and that translates to humans. If you know that there's a family on the other side of this planet who pull up a blanket to their son's chin every night, how could you be okay with bombing them? You know what I mean? Like, so if you get to know, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think just once you get to know about other things besides yourself, you have you have a bigger tenderness towards other things and other people. And yeah, I just hope that we can turn that around soon, because this gleeful sense of like, let's make us good, let's you know, distrust science, and let's not pay attention to anything else but ourselves is such destructive force that makes, I mean, just makes me cringe. So
Yeah, I mean, it's truly awful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makenna, it's really interesting what Aimee's saying, because I feel like nature obviously plays such a different role in your book, because it's, correct me, I mean, in some ways or some moments it's an oppositional force, or kind of pushing against Alma and how she's trying to kind of like regain her identity. How are you thinking of nature in your book, with her kind of confronting the reality of her surroundings?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I agree with everything that Aimee just said, and I feel like I live that way. I feel sort of like this dark looming cloud. It's like, sorry, but here I go. But like, yeah, I think that joy and refuge and compassion and happiness and becoming, you know, the act of becoming is, I feel like, humbled is such a sort of noodly word, but I think when you are witnessing the patterns in nature, everything else, it just, things make sense in a spiritual way, I think. And I think, you know, the passings of, I was just remarking on this today. We were taking a walk with my family, and I was like, oh, it's so cold. We were checking on the chickens, and I said, oh God, it's so cold. What is this? You know, because I forget every fall that fall is a thing. And then when fall comes, you know, it's like, what's going to happen next? And, you know, and then it reminds you of kind of the seasons of humanity, like the seasons of us all, kind of. Things are always changing. I know in Mississippi, the seasons are different, and that's, you know, like I'm in the Northeast, but in my book, nature and the natural world was, on the one hand, a place for the narrator that inspires wonder in the narrator, and that she comes back to, that's the home that will always be there. That's the constant, that's the goal, that's the heart, that's the center. And yet it's also a metaphor for the system in which we live as humans, and that while she has made a decision to leave this system of sort of extraction and commerce and commodity, in favor of moving the sheep and fermenting the sauerkraut and living close to nature and sledding and everything, all, you know, I mean, all of the sort of wonders of nature, they also don't keep the system out that she is trying to escape. Right. It remains, whether it's within her, or whether it's just in the air, or just, you know. But also it's interesting because there's a lot of violence in nature too. And especially with animal husbandry and homesteading and farming, there's a lot of death, and there's a lot of power and a lot of wielding of that power. And a lot of rationalization for the wielding and why the wielding is necessary. So, you know, well, if we raise our own cows and we slaughter them on farm and they have a great life and they don't notice they're dead, and the last thing they see before you shoot them is their baby, that's good. And then we'll eat them. And that meat will not have anguish in its cellular metabolism. So we won't be eating that anguish. Whereas, you know, a CAFO raised cow is full of anguish, and then we consume that anguish. Well, within that, just within that structure, that binary, you have all of the people who can't raise their own animals and who can only afford the CAFO meat. And so does that mean that those who can't afford the good anguish-free meat are full of anguish? And so how does that sort of define the way we think of joy and happiness, and the way we think of oneness. I think of, Aimee, I don't know if you have these, this is like naive, I should know if they're in Mississippi, but the sapsucker. Do you have that bird, the sapsucker?
I don't know if it's in Mississippi, actually. I'm still learning all the birds and
I
stuff.
don't either.
Exciting, but I do know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, the sapsucker, it's a yellow-bellied sapsucker, and it's a type of woodpecker, basically. And in this spring, we were just completely overrun with these yellow-bellied sapsuckers, and they're just drumming on the deck, drilling in a tree, everywhere the drilling. And we said, you know, what is this bird? And we were overwhelmed with its presence and what it was telling us. What is this bird? What is this bird? It's so beautiful. So we looked up this bird and we realized it was a sapsucker, and we looked deeper into it and we saw that sapsuckers actually drill into living trees and drain a living tree of its sap until it dies.
Oh, jeez.
And that not only do they do that, but they inspire hummingbirds to follow their pattern. Because the hummingbirds say, well, that's convenient. Like I'll go and take part in this beautiful sap that's coming from the tree. And actually hummingbirds have changed their migratory patterns to follow the sapsucker. So you see that like there are plenty of trees that could be drilled that are not living. And so to me, like the dark cloud looming is sort of alongside the wonder for me comes the kind of chaos and the destruction of nature too. And like, the praying mantis that eats her mate, or the orb spider that's consumed by its babies when they're born, that there's like, I don't even want to call it darkness, but there's nuance and and that to me, when I think about what Aimee describes of this sort of fascist doom club that's running the universe, it seems, and that seeks pleasure in harming others, how does that make sense if we too are part of the natural world as humans? I don't know. And I think of myself, oh, well, this is not my presidency. Well, I could say that, but in fact, it is, like this is our presidency. So what does that say about, anyway, but Milkweed's so great. So Yana, over to you. You guys are a light in the storm.
Well, I was just going to say that both of these books, I mean, I have to go back and agree with Aimee that it's a practice all the time. It's a practice to fall in love. It's a practice to fall in love with yourself. It's a practice to fall in love with your community. It's a practice to fall in love with your neighborhood. It's a practice to fall in love with the tree outside of your window. And there's light and dark all the time. And the darkness and the lightness that we see most often is manufactured. It's produced for us in some way or another as related to capitalism and commodity, which is a lot of what Makenna is wrestling with in The Shame. But I do want to say before this thought escapes me, because I love these kinds of questions and I love these conversations, is that both of these books in different ways reminded me of that practice. It reminded me how to fall in love with both light and dark, because that's inevitable. Like things are going to be so fucked up. The praying mantis does eat its mate, which is a fact I remember learning in like 3rd grade and being like, sometimes you love the darkness. Sometimes you relate to the darkness. But there's a scene in The Shame where Alma takes the reader or herself through all 4 seasons in this rapid fire, beautiful choreographed scene where right next to like beauty and sensuality of summer and spring is like the death and decay of fall and winter. And it's almost overwhelming. I remember the first time I read the scene, I had to read it again because I was reminded how easy it is to fall deeply in love with that balance of nature. I can love the smell of decaying, leaves on the sidewalk when it's fall. At the same moment, it reminds me that winter is coming. And I live in a place where winter can be very, very difficult. It can be certainly difficult for folks without homes. It can be difficult for, I can go down a whole list of why it's difficult. But there is also something really beautiful about that first snow and like the glitter and kind of the crystals. And then Aimee's book, I know we talk a lot about joy and whimsy and wonder. I mean, it's World of Wonders, right? But Aimee, I've heard you say this, and I say it too. It's not, not every single essay is, yay, I had a great time, and here I am relating it to this really beautiful, vibrant flower. Everyone's life comes with its own set of challenges. And certainly Aimee has had challenges in her life. And there are really difficult, sad moments where she wrestles with them. And what she does, or what how I read it, is that she turns back to her 4-year-old, 5-year-old self of curiosity. The Peacock Essay comes to mind, obviously. I mean, and that's one that I know a lot of people have talked about as well, in that this was a moment for you to kind of re-engage with your identity and who you are. And you did so, through a series of learning, kind of the scientific and cultural and social things about a peacock and then a peacock became meaningful to you in your own way, but you went through something really difficult to come to that. So I just wanted to say, there's just light and dark in everything. And both of these books reminded me in different ways what it feels like to fall in love. Sometimes it feels like ecstasy, and sometimes it feels like doom.
Joanna, can you talk to kind of the legacy of natural writing with Milkweed? I mean, I feel like both of these works really kind of speak to the core mission of what the press does. But I'd be kind of interested to know how that evolved and how that originated and where you see it going in this kind of dark time.
Totally. And I'll do my best. I haven't been there from the beginning. Milkweed is celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. So happy birthday to Milkweed, a beautiful plant that I certainly have bye, Herky. Oh.
This is my favorite part about Zoom.
Yeah, the natural world.
That you took your dog out.
He had another Zoom meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
Like cats outside or something.
Sorry.
Don't be sorry. This is like such joy for me. So I just want to say I'll do my very best, but of course I haven't been there from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I know that in the beginning, Milkweed was launched by a woman named Emily Buchwald and her friend, who I terribly am forgetting his name. He was an illustrator, and they started it as a journal. It actually started as the Milkweed Chronicle, and it started as this kind of like craft experiment, community-based in Minneapolis experiment among this growing community of writers. Minneapolis has quite a robust community of writers, and it always has, but it seems to be growing in its own unique and beautiful ways. So at the time, 40 years ago, there was, a great writer community here. And so they started small, as most things begin. And a lot of what they were doing from the beginning were illustrations. They were illustrated pieces. And Minnesota and Minneapolis is a very, if you live here, you probably like being outside. Probably, you might not, that's fine too, but many of us here, because we live in a city where lakes are a big fabric of the city, they're kind of like the heart of the city. People are canoeing, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, whatever, in this natural space. So that's where Milkweed itself was, born. And it grew and it grew and it grew and it got bigger. They eventually shelved the journal idea and said, let's start publishing books. They also published YA books for a period of time. And then most recently, I'd say in the past, 15 years, there certainly has been intention in publishing books that have to deal with the natural world. And I will say, for, hopefully without sounding defensive by any means, when I was first hired in 2016, some of the work, I was hired as a publicist, some of the work I was doing was trying to convince pieces of the media or part of the media that we're not just a nature publisher, as if that, you know, required defending.
Right.
I don't think a lot of people, there was this niche, wonderful group of people, especially Orion Magazine, you know, shout out to Aimee. There were these niche group of people in the literary sphere and outside of the literary sphere who loved Bill Holm, who loved the work that we were putting out. But certainly when we acquired Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, that nature writing part of our publishing program became more visible. And I love giving shout outs. This is a huge shout out to booksellers. Booksellers did this. This book, Braiding Sweetgrass, has done something to readers and to us as a publisher that I don't think we were really expecting. I don't think we really knew what we had. I mean, we knew that it was beautiful writing about reciprocity. A woman writing from these multiple perspectives, her indigenous perspective, being a mother, being a botanist, weaving it all together to try to impart this wisdom of being better to the world, of listening, of attention, and of practice. And it's been something that has changed people's lives. They have said that it has changed their life in the way that they've you know, walked outside of their neighborhood. And part of what Milkweed, you know, our mission literally says that we publish transformative books. And Braiding Sweetgrass is an obvious example of that. But books like World of Wonders, it brings you into these, it takes you all over the world. The Corpse Flower, one of my favorite little not little, huge beings. Obviously the axolotl, you know, the Mexican salamander, takes you to all of these places. And so that's a really obvious way to say that it transforms the reader's mind. But it also transforms the reader's mind in ways that I think I'll probably be repeating myself, in that there's that intimacy in learning about nature. It's not just the textbook, it's not a science book. It can be intersectional. It can be more than one thing. And nature writing can be so much more than I think the mainstream has given its due diligence. It's given its, we've defined it in pretty square dimensions. And a big part of that has to do with marketing and money and who's getting published and how they're getting published and how visible they are. I think where we'll go is that we'll just continue seeking this work. You know, Makenna's book, it's not a book about Alma's not like a forester who's, you know, but it transforms the way you think about systems in our life. And that's just as transformative to us as Milkweed than something like Braiding Sweetgrass. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
No, that makes absolute sense. I'm interested kind of from all of you to know, you know, with this evolution, if you feel, you know, Aimee and Makenna, if you feel like your responsibility as a writer or your role as a writer has changed. Even, I imagine when you started writing these books, the world was a very different place. And moving forward, yeah, do you see your kind of obligation as a writer, has it evolved at all? And Joanna, the same kind of question for you, especially, you know, considering Minneapolis and everything that's been happening. Do you see your role as a press changing in kind of reaction to what you've seen?
Aimee?
Yeah, I'll just say briefly. One of the things, I mean, Milkweed is such a dream press for so many reasons, not the least of which is that when I looked at their list, I also didn't have to be the only brown person on their list. And for the outdoors, Milkweed has just been on the forefront, not because it's cool because this summer happened, but they were bringing in voices like Drew Lanham, who frankly, without Milkweed, I knew his work from Orion, but it was through his book with Milkweed that I discovered there's more than one Black bird watcher out there. And I'm horrified that I didn't know that. But I wanted to say how transformative that has been on Milkweed's part to open up a whole nother world to me. And this is a subject that I've been reading about since the late 70s, early 80s, and I never saw brown people in writing about the outdoors, certainly not Asian Americans. And want to just do a shout out to Milkweed for being so fearless and not at all saying, stay in your lane, keep your eyes on poetry. You know, they took my wackadoodle ideas and they not only said like, this sounds possible. They said like, it's not only possible, we're gonna take this to a whole nother level. So I just, I think if every press can look to Milkweed as a guide for that, to say like, hey, there's a whole segment of the population that is maybe not on our backlist. Maybe it's 2020, we should maybe turn to other, other kinds of writers that we're publishing, whether it be, maybe you don't have any people with different abilities on your list or sexualities on your list, besides the dominant ones, that are around. Like, pay attention to what you're promoting is what I would say. And I don't have any obligation except for the fact that I'm just so thrilled. I'm aware of how few publishers do this. Take this chance. And so I just want to, I told Daniel, the editor-in-chief, and my whole marketing and publishing team that I will work so hard, to make sure that this vision comes alive, and hopefully I'm doing it. But because I don't want them to say like, hey, well, we gave a chance on the one Asian American and she blew it, or she's just like eating bonbons on her orange chair, and not that they would ever say that, but just to show what's out there. And I think the response has been so overwhelming. And I think that should be a heads up to other publishers that, to follow Milkweed's lead on that.
Aimee, I know that you need to go in a second, so I want to get to Makenna, but I just want to ask you what you're working on now and what we should expect from you next.
Oh gosh, that's always like, I feel like if I announce it, then I'll jinx myself.
Sure,
but
whatever you feel comfortable with.
I hate that answer too. I always thought, don't be so coy. So I will at least say this. I've been working on some stuff for kids, but I'm a poet at heart. I'm always writing poetry. So I'm working on a middle grade novel right now. Something in verse. I'm not sure what it is yet. This is the percolating magical stage where everything seems like a possibility, and I haven't reached the banging my head against the wall stage yet. So let me just stay there a little bit longer.
Be happy, it'll come, right?
Thank you all so much. Normally I would just be finishing out the night and being the last one on the Zoom, but I do have to run, and I'm just so, I hope you can hear it in my voice. I hope you can see it on my face, how much I believe in this press and booksellers, like all the independent booksellers here, Politics and Prose. I'm just sad I wasn't able to be there in person and buy up stuff on your shelves, but that should be to everybody else in the chat to buy up stuff on their shelves at the end of this evening as well. Thanks, Makenna. Thanks, Yana.
Thanks, Aimee.
Loved your book.
Makenna, how do you feel about that? One thing I kept thinking about when I was reading your book, and this is probably a little strange, but so many people I know have left the city and have now moved to the country, thinking that they're ready for it, or thinking that it's just like a lifestyle transition as opposed to kind of reordering. And psychologically, some of them I'm not sure they're ready. In a way, I feel like the shame is almost like a field guide to people from Brooklyn that are now moving to the Catskills. Read this book first and consider what you want. I was wondering, it's kind of a multi-pronged question, but I was wondering, first of all, if you feel how it seems to you now being on the other side of Alma's journey, and with this kind of demographic shift, if you think about it differently. And also just kind of the question I asked to Aimee about, do you feel a shift in your own responsibility or obligation as a writer, with this kind of mess that we're in?
Yeah, well, I think we were in a mess before COVID.
Fair enough.
And so I would say that I wrote this in the mess already.
Right. I love that.
I feel like, I know you agree with that. I'm just saying, I don't feel, I think that publishing needs to have a transformation. And I loved what Aimee said about Milkweed and how just like authentically inclusive Milkweed's list is, and not in a way that feels like, and now we're going to check off these boxes because we know in 2020 that we're supposed to be checking these boxes off. And I don't know if that has to do with being a nonprofit press or being in Minneapolis or the editorial staff or, the whole staff. Like, I think part of publishing are the people, the individuals involved. And so I think that that's remarkable. And it's interesting. I feel like, there's something about the moment, and writing to the moment. And someone said this, I think this is a major cliche, but someone recently said, criticizing a book. There's a difference between timeliness and timelessness when a book is coming out. And I think that a lot of people are going to be writing their pandemic novel or writing about, I don't know, just like the horrors that we're experiencing now. And I think that they're the same horrors, actually. Like, obviously they're more pressing, but we've seen these trends of upwardly mobile, predominantly white individuals leaving the city to the country. In the Depression era, there was a back to the land movement. You had the colonists, the European colonists coming over. That was sort of a back to the, let's leave London, let's leave, the cities. Sorry. And so I think that there's a really interesting dynamic that I was exploring in The Shame of claiming nature and retreating to nature as this refuge, as this place where you can go when everything becomes too much to bear.
Right.
And I think that is under the assumption that it's just the wilderness, like it's just this big forest and we're just going there with our baggage. And in fact, there are people there. And those people have been there and they've had a life there. And I always laugh, when now everyone's leaving leaving cities more because they can't do the fun things that they were doing before. They're going to get sick and die or whatever. And all the people who are leaving are the ones who can afford to leave. Yeah. And I think there's this like amazing moment of, rural life is a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Their whole communities, there's, and I don't know. I just think that there's a real colonial mindset in the idea of leaving the city for the country. And yet it's sort of couched in this really compelling, really powerful feeling of self-care, of a feeling of being against something that's really disempowering. So it's two sides of a coin where it's like you want to feel whole, and nature, as Aimee, beautifully writes about in her book, nature is a place where we can find wholeness, where anyone can sit, in the forest and feel like, I don't know, closer to something that is real, quote unquote. And yet, not everybody can do that. And what does that mean? I don't know. So I'm sort of rambling at this point, but I guess I would say art for me, writing for me is always it feels like an inquiry into these systems of injustice, but mainly just entrapment. And how can we see past the obvious? How can we say, in addition to leaving the city and going to a small rural area, I'm going to inquire how I do that, or what conversations I have at the general store, or how I see myself. Am I, part of gentrification? What does that mean, etc. So yeah, I guess I would say I couldn't not write that way, perhaps, or I wouldn't be able to, or if I were able to, I would want someone to stop me.
No, I mean, I think that makes so much sense. This idea that it's like an easy answer and not, as we spoke about earlier, practice or attention. That it's not, you don't go and it's given to you. You have to work for it, just like anything else, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I know that we're kind of running out of time, so I did want to ask first, Makenna, kind of what you're working on and what you're thinking about in this moment. What kind of project is percolating for you?
I'm working on a new novel, and it explores themes. It explores agriculture and access to nature and who gets to claim nature. And I'm really interested in the implications of the Back to the Land movements in this country since the Depression and perhaps before that. And the idea of a progressive movement that seeks to create an existence counter to this kind of the commodification of capitalism, or whatever you want to call it, the oligarchy, breaking down the barriers between labor and daily life, and labor and fulfillment and self-reliance, and what are the implications of like the difference between ethics and ethical choices and the idea of private contentment, and how it's one thing to be happy, we should all be happy, but it's another thing to gather what's yours and store it away. And what does it mean to
and put it on Instagram? Yeah,
well, and put it on Instagram, sure, but like, that's required of us, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, I feel like not really. Yeah, I'm interested in, we come from the soil and we're going back to the soil. So that's where I'm at right now, is what does that mean? Like, a lot about soil. I've always been thinking about soil.
Truly, truly exciting. I can't wait to hear about that. Joanna, what else should we be looking for from Milkweed? What's kind of coming up that you want to make sure people know about along the lines of these two great books?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say, or just use this opportunity to really quickly say that the publishing industry should absolutely have a major transformation, and that's a blanket general statement that many, many people have said and will continue to say, and I won't have anything incredibly enlightening to add to it. But with that being said, I just wanted to say, like, we are people, and I hope that anyone who's attending right now and reach out to us, ask us questions, tell us when you like a book. And I don't mean on social media. I mean, certainly do it on social media, but I will say I just watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix. And if you haven't watched it.
I haven't, but I heard of it. I just heard about it tonight.
Sayonara. See you later. Yeah. We're all fucked. But I mean, like an email or something. Like, let's take it back old school, like communicate. I think one thing publishing and every single individual needs to do is to listen and to ask questions, like you've been saying, like we've been saying this whole time. So as far as like me pitching books right now, I just wanted to slip that in there. Like I
that's
love
here though, is mission as much as books. And I was also going to ask how people can best support you. So I think you're saying communication.
Yeah. And I mean, also, like, just briefly to an earlier point too, Milkweed is a nonprofit. So that means, very simply that we're not for profit. So we don't solely have to make money off of the product that we are producing in order to survive as a business. We do survive partly off of the sales of our books. And when people buy our books, it tells us a story about what readers want and what makes them feel more whole. But because we're not for profit, we don't have to respond to the sales, right? Like, when a book is selling really well, yay, awesome, hell yes. But we don't say, okay, let's make sure we only publish more books exactly like this. You know what I mean? Like, we can publish those books that won't sell well or whatever, because it's about exposing writers who come from all different types of experiences, debut writers, hybrid writers, strange writers, the new writer you've never heard of, which I guess is a debut writer, the writer who is older than we would expect a writer to be, we can do that because we are a nonprofit. But I also want to say we can always be doing better. We certainly can be doing better. I love working at Milkweed, and I love when people love Milkweed, but we will continue to publish books from even more variety of people moving forward, because publishing needs to make a change very quick. We need to take it serious.
Yeah. In every level. Yeah.
Yeah. That all being said, there are some books I'm pretty excited about. Diane Wilson is I just want to plug this quickly, another novel. I know Joey is here or watching. So Joey acquired Makenna's book, and Joey also acquired a new novel that we'll be publishing in March, which feels very far away, but it's certainly not that far away. And you can pre-order the book I'm about to tell you about from Politics and Prose, or from your
email after this with lots of information. So email it to me and I'll make sure everyone gets it.
Okay, good. Yeah. Yes, let's do it.
Go Claire.
Pre-orders are actually really important because, all right, I'll stop. I feel like one plug leads me.
But there's so much more to talk about.
Anyway, very, very.
I think that so I've heard a lot of people have said to me like, oh, you're so lucky in this post-pandemic world to be, or this current in pandemic world, we're not post it, but you know what I mean? Like COVID universe, you're so lucky to be publishing with Milkweed because they have so much integrity. And I think that that's something that the publishing industry, no offense, I have worked in the publishing industry for a long time, has very little of it, actually. I think when you're chasing the dollar and you're chasing what sells, you're going to publish books that are, that don't necessarily like move us in a direction of love and understanding and conversation and discourse and revolution. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need. Because if we don't have that, then our culture is a reflection of our commerce, and our commerce is a reflection of the oligarchy, and it's not the people. And we need to read and look at and watch art that's made by the people, because the people will set us free. I'm convinced, and nature too. But like we're totally fucked if we don't support grassroots politics, grassroots art, grassroots, independent bookstores. I have never in my life been so amazed by booksellers. I know that everyone says booksellers are so great, and it's true, but it is like amazing to me the kind of support that they give for the arts and culture in general. It's not just selling books. They're about reading. You're about reading, and that is what it's education. So anyway.
We don't read anymore. We're too tired. We're just shipping books. But someday, it'll happen again. I need to end this. I will say, Makenna, there was a great question for you that we didn't get to. I'm going to email that to you so you can see that question. We will send out a list of everything we talked about. And thank you both so much. And thank you to Aimee for inaugurating this series. We're really grateful to you.
Thank you, Liz. Are you sure we can't keep doing this for 5 more hours?
I know, right? It's just like, as the participant, it's just like.
We really appreciate, we love Politics and Prose, and like Makenna said, y'all are the lifeblood, and you don't get enough credit. And even if you aren't reading, you're doing other fucking cool stuff. So thank you for everything you're doing, Liz.
And everybody sign up September 30th at Politics and Prose. This is the galley, but Long Live the Post Horn by Vigdis Hjorth, which I reviewed in the LA Review of Books in late October, a little late, but brilliant book, brilliant writer.
Sheila Heti.
With Sheila Heti, also brilliant.
Vandermeer.
Yeah. Vigdis Hjorth this book is amazing, as is she. So Politics and Prose, September 30th.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night.